Hello, this presentation is brought to you by Katie, Tiara, and Amber, and we did our reflection on the article Teach Them How by Elizabeth Rosich.
To summarize, in this article, the author was implementing critical pedagogy in an 8th grade history class for the first time. And one of the main issues was that students did not know how to have academic discussions. They saw the work as too hard and too much work also. So one of the big issues is that the author had to teach them how to think critically and kind of had to go back on her original idea of implementing critical pedagogy and had to also think about CRT and strategic teaching as well. She had to do a lot of self-evaluation and development throughout the whole process as well. So she had to go back and adjust strategies. This meant gradually increasing complexity while decreasing the rigidity of the environment. So she really had to think about how she could teach these students and think about her own ideas as well. At the very end, she had students do a quick survey where she discovered that students valued high academic expectations, emotional connection, and critical perspective. Some of the quick were that we're understanding the importance of understanding what your students know. So this means not making assumptions. You have to really make sure that you understand what they know before you go into planning your lessons. It's also important to learn about your students. So knowing them and who they are and how you can use that and their assets to teach them. Also supplementing curriculum and embracing their personal connections. So using what you know about them and not just relying specifically on what is given to you in the classroom, but how you can bring in other resources as well. And then setting high expectations for all students and develop trust through relationship building and self-development as well. So really thinking about how you can grow and develop also. Some challenges that I faced throughout my time was that we were expected to use higher order thinking questions, but I noticed that students really struggled with these, and overall they had a hard time understanding some of my questions. Also, students' lack of background knowledge. So, for example, in a lesson about character traits, students had a hard time deciphering between thoughts and actions when I had assumed that they already knew this. And then another thing was different teaching styles and conflicting expectations as far as working with a variety of different teachers and trying to establish my own style as well. This turned out to be quite difficult.
Some of the challenges that I faced in practice were that I did a lesson on money, and I expected the students to know the money names and the values, and I quickly realized that they couldn't identify coins from pictures or when I showed them real coins. The students had a lack of background knowledge, and I had a misunderstanding of what they know versus what they were expected to know, and little understanding on how to adapt to what they knew mid-lesson.
Some of the challenges that I faced in my practice was when I was developing a social studies lesson. Supposedly, my students were learning social studies with another teacher, and I had looked at the standards and thought, okay, this is what they're learning. This is what they should be learning. This is what they should know. And when I went to get information in order to develop my own social studies lesson, I was met with blank faces and eventually the question of what is social studies. So my students didn't even know what I was talking about and what the topic was when I had assumed that they already had all this previous background knowledge and that I would be able to build on top of that. And then an additional challenge that I faced was my teacher asked me to teach the math lesson pretty on the spot, either day of or day before, and she said, oh, all you have to do is look at the lesson and teach it. And when I looked at that lesson, I realized I have no idea the vocabulary that the students had been introduced to in previous lessons. So I didn't know how to determine what certain terms were that they needed to know versus what I had grown up knowing and what they previously were learning, and how to really make the lesson so that they understood what I was teaching based on what they knew. So just looking at the curriculum isn't enough because it doesn't always tell you what students learned in the previous year or even the previous lesson if you don't take the time to go back and look at that. Some of the trends that we noticed altogether was that we all had the surface level understanding of our students. It shows that we didn't really take the time to find out truly what they knew and what they could connect with. We just assumed since they were supposed to have this background knowledge based on their age or their grade level or where they were at in the year, that they did have that knowledge and that they grasped those concepts, and we were going to use those as foundations for our lessons. And obviously that wasn't the case. This was an issue because it not only proved that we didn't take the time to get to know our students and know the knowledge that they possessed, it also meant that our lessons weren't as effective. It shows that students should know something. Even though students should know something based on the standards or the framework, it doesn't mean that they grasp those concepts and or even were introduced to them in previous grades when they should have been. It also shows that we did not differentiate the lessons for students with the lack of this knowledge because, as shown through our challenges, we had to come up with differentiation and scaffolding kind of on the spot as we realized it was an issue rather than planning for that.
So for theory and research, while doing the readings, it talked about the achievement gap and how schools have created dependent learners unprepared to do higher order thinking, which is what was referenced in the article. The students are not taught how to learn, they're just taught what to learn. And culturally and linguistically diverse students' opportunities to develop habits of mind and cognitive capacities are limited or non-existent because of educational inequalities. And continuing on culture responsive teaching, you need to look at racial, cultural, and ethnic diversity as students' assets. They bring something into the class. Caring and trusting relationships are foundational to the classroom. They should be center in your classroom. And knowing your students, families, and community should be used to guide instruction that will interest your students in order to give your students more opportunity to do higher order thinking.